Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Ethan Beute. Other than being my good friend, he is also the chief evangelist over at BombBomb, the host of the Customer Experience podcast, and the co-host of the CX series here on B2B Growth. Ethan, how's it going today, man?
It's going great.
Awesome, man. I am so pumped to chat with you. I'm always excited to chat with you. I think this may be my first time actually getting to interview you for B2B Growth, man.
Right. All my previous visits have been with James, and we've had many conversations. We just don't record them all.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to start doing it more often, especially because, for folks have maybe heard this story before, but it was actually an interview James did with you way back in the day, several years back, that actually put James and Sweetfish on my radar. So that always holds a special place in my heart. But we're not talking about me waxing sentimental today. We're going to be talking about LinkedIn engagement groups. It's something that you and I on a regular, daily, weekly basis are involved with, but something that other folks might not be aware of how they could get value out of it, how they can use it to up their game on LinkedIn. But before we get into that, man, as we always do, for folks who aren't as familiar with you as James and myself and the rest of the Sweetfish team, give us a little background on yourself and what you and the BombBomb team are up to these days, man.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. I am helping people communicate more clearly, build human connection, and ultimately increase conversion. And those conversions are micro conversions like email replies and return phone calls. And there are macro conversions like signed contracts or commitments and everything in between. And we help you do that by replacing some of your plain black text on the same plain white screen, this faceless digital communication with simple personal videos. So no lights, no scripts, no editing, no production necessary, just casual conversational video to humanize the messages that you're sending out and to build better relationships with all the people that you're reaching out to. So that's what we do at BombBomb. We have software that helps you do that. I've been with the team for 8 years. And so I write on it, I speak on it, I podcast on it. I'm just all about it. It's just been such a joy to watch people transform the way they work and the way they're connecting with people with their webcams and smartphones. It's so much easier to do than people think. And so that's the evangelist part.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think it's interesting how you've moved into that chief evangelist role. To me, it was just such a natural segue of what you've done for a long time on the BombBomb team. And, to your point about it being easier than people think, I've found, usually at the encouragement of some of your content and our conversations, as we were talking about, that sometimes video is just not only more effective, but it's more efficient, because instead of laboring over those 3 to 4 paragraphs, I want to make sure I get that intention and tonality right. I can just do that by flipping on my webcam. And I've recorded more videos, just simple, personal, one-to-one videos like you're talking about over the last year than I ever have. And I can tell you it's made a big difference. So appreciate what you're doing there, man.
Yeah, thank you. It's you also save time by reducing some of that back and forth as well, like clarifying questions and getting to the intention and meaning, because you get it right the first time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. All right. Well, with that, let's dive into LinkedIn engagement groups. For folks who aren't as familiar with this term, some people know them as engagement pods. We call them LinkedIn engagement groups. For folks who this is their first time hearing this, they're like, wait, LinkedIn has groups. I know that. Is this different? Give us a little bit of context for the newcomer to this conversation.
Sure. My understanding of them is that it's a select group of folks, as few as 3 or 4, as many as probably 20 or 30. And it happens in LinkedIn messaging. So instead of being in that little group section on the left rail that most of us forgot about several years ago, which is really a sad fact. I took a look at mine recently. I jumped into one, like it hadn't had any content in 5 years. It's like, wow, that one didn't go anywhere. Instead, this is in messaging. And so you get better alerts. It's much more personal. And essentially, what you're doing is sharing your content in this message thread so that other people can go out and engage with it. And so when you drop a post in there early on, after posting it to LinkedIn, when you drop it into one of these engagement groups, it helps kind of create that conversation and help it start getting organic reach right away. And I've seen it dramatically help some of the posts that I've put up.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to some of the results that you've seen to recap for folks. The groups on LinkedIn. I'm with you, Ethan. They've never really taken off. I saw your post the other day asking about, are people seeing value from them? Have they forgotten about them? Which was kind of the general consensus. And I think of engagement groups more like a group text thread on iMessage or text in general. And the strategy for folks like you and I that have been involved in these groups is, it gives a common area where you can, engage with a select group of, let's say 3 to 30 people, but you can also copy a link to a post or an article that you just published. And it makes it very easy for folks to see it and not just happen upon it in their feed. And therefore they can give it some early engagement. So with that, you mentioned, you've seen some greater organic reach, maybe not even necessarily results, but what was the process like for you in getting involved in engagement groups? And then maybe we can speak to some of the results you've seen.
It's an interesting pattern, right? So you start to find like-minded folks. Let's say there are 10 or 15 people in a pod or a group. I'm going to really appreciate the content of, say, 7 or 8 of them in particular. And you wind up having really high quality conversations on those. And what it does is, when LinkedIn starts seeing that there is activity on the post, it just, shows up in other people's feeds, like this person just commented on this or this person liked this. It just creates that greater push out of the gate. It also starts conversations. When you find people in these groups that are thoughtful about their comments, and we can get into some of these nuances as we go into the conversation. But I don't always have time to read the whole thing, click through, check the thing out, and add a fully thoughtful response. I try to do that as often as possible. And when that happens, it really creates some good conversations on whatever you're trying to learn about. And in passing, if it's just kind of a quick, lightweight comment because the person doesn't have time to go deep on the content and put a thoughtful response or question or call other people over that might be interested in it, and all these other nice things that happen, that comment alone also helps extend the reach and show the LinkedIn algorithm, which is constantly changing. That'd be a whole nother conversation, a whole nother episode. But it's just a signal that this is something that people want to look at and talk about. So I've just seen the reach of my posts and really my network overall grow very dramatically over the past year or so of doing this consistently, in part because you build real relationships with some of the people in the groups, and in part because participation helps extend the reach, and other people will see your content, other people engage with the content, and the ones that really connect with what you're sharing will often reach out with a connection request and that kind of a thing.
Absolutely, man. I've seen both of the things that you indicated there, greater organic reach of my content and just organic growth of my own network go from, about, I think 1,000 or 1,500 to about 5,500. I think that's over the span of about a year and a half or so. And that was with, no specific outbound campaign. I'm doing some other personalized connection requests with people I have on B2B Growth here and those sorts of things. So it's not solely attributed to that, but I've seen both of those steadily climb up and to the right. So for folks who are new to utilizing engagement groups, Ethan, what are some of your pieces of advice? I've seen everything from people putting out content on their company page and dropping a link to that in, to sharing their own personal posts and articles just since you've been at it for a little while, what's some of your advice?
So for context, I only put my personal posts in there. I don't take posts from other pages and drop them in there. I do like that idea. I think that'd be a very effective strategy. And I have seen that in some of the groups that I'm in. You have to dedicate yourself to it. Like anything, you're only going to get out of it what you put into it. And so if you're just looking to dump posts in there and not participate, I think it's not going to take very long for you to see diminishing returns where people stop engaging with your stuff. I mean, when you see people in the groups and you recognize their names and their faces and you kind of know what they're about now because they're engaging with your stuff, you're engaging with theirs, you get to know each other. And so, you see, it doesn't take long to shake out the people that are just operating in a more selfish way. And I'm not looking to punish anyone. I'm just, if you're not participating at all with any of my content and I don't find your content all that interesting, I'm probably not going to participate with yours. I might, if it's interesting to me, I might do it anyway and hope that maybe the favor gets returned. But I think one thing that I've done that's been very helpful is just commit. Okay, I'm going to take 10 minutes. I'm going to shift click every single post that I haven't looked at yet. So they pop up in separate tabs and just one by one, I'm going to read them. I'm going to I'm going to comment and just close them down as I go. And so I pop them all open, engage with them and close them all down as I go. And so in that way, I tend not to miss anything that I want to hit. I try to create the space to do it so that I can actually read the content. This is another thing too. Cool thing about it is, I didn't curate any of these groups. I got invited into them. And so there are a lot of people talking about things that are not what I would normally seek out. I think one of the interesting things about all the social networks that we participate in, and I use about 4 of them actively, LinkedIn being the leading one, but they all have the opportunity to become more like an echo chamber where you're only seeing the stuff that you engage in and the it's interesting. I went deep into my Facebook stuff and shut a whole bunch of things down over the holiday break. And, I just took, honestly, no joke, I spent 2 hours in the back end of Facebook looking at all the stuff that was in there and turning things off and leaving groups and unliking pages and things. And it's interesting the profile they build on you, and it will start to affect what you see. And so I learn a lot by engaging with these people who are talking about topics that I wouldn't normally seek out. I wouldn't normally validate. And the cool thing is you start to see these people in your feed normally because it's smart enough to know that you're engaging with their content regularly. And so that's happening a lot as well. So popping open all the posts that you have not looked at, taking time to do that. If I have the opportunity, I'll do it twice a day. I'll do it first thing in the morning and usually, last thing on the way out the door so that I don't ever fall too far behind. When you do fall behind, you see, I know you've seen this, the apology, hey, I'm really sorry. I haven't been around lately. Please don't, in parentheses, please don't punish me for not having engaged with your stuff in the past 2 weeks or whatever. I've been out of the country or whatever. So, you get what you give. And so I like to participate. I think it's okay if you find, I don't know what your experience is. I should probably give this back to you now. But, you see some people that are very, very, very self-promotional. I try not to validate efforts that I don't fully identify with because you are also putting your name out there. You are liking, you are commenting. It's the same thing too when you get kind of spammy looking connection requests. If you accept them just out of hand, at a certain point, people in your network are going to be reached out to by this, there's tons of spam out there. I'm just using that generically as a catch-all for highly self-motivated, not value-oriented people and things. And at a certain point, Logan, you're going to get a connection request from someone and it's going to say, Ethan Beute is a mutual friend, right? So that reflects on me. And so I engage as much as I can, but I do it in a way that is sincere and authentic to me, in addition to being a give to the other person. And so you have to find your own line. I don't want to put the stamp of approval on things that I'm just not bought in on. That's infrequent, but it is something that I'm sensitive to.
Man, there is so much to unpack. As usual, when we have these conversations, man, I'm just given a lot to think about. I mean, you mentioned there that a lot of people don't necessarily think about, okay, if I'm in an engagement group, if I like or comment on something, that's, leaning into that law of reciprocity. If I'm regularly engaging with your content, Ethan, you're more likely to engage with mine because maybe it's not something that really strikes a chord with you, but you're like, hey, Logan struck up this conversation conversation, tag 2 people on my post, I'm going to go ahead and think of something to put in there. But a lot of people don't think about, hey, by engaging with other people's posts and setting aside time to do it regularly, you're putting your name in more people's feeds. And that is part of this strategy here. James and I did an entire episode on how to leave thoughtful comments on LinkedIn posts, because most people don't realize that when you comment on something, that's showing up in someone else's feed that Ethan Beute commented on this. And that's a way for me to see things. And that's how your posts are getting more visibility. But the commenting itself is helping you get more visibility. And is that visibility that you want? And as the way that you approach most things, you put a lot of thought and intentionality behind that. So I love what you're saying there, as well as just time blocking to make it efficient. You mentioned, the notifications being easier than LinkedIn groups. You can keep this entirely separate from your email, right? I've turned off the mobile notifications on LinkedIn, as I have with almost pretty much everything except for phone calls and texts, like Slack, email, everything. But again, probably another conversation on digital clutter and all those sorts of things that we can chat on for a while. But when I log into LinkedIn, it makes it very easy for me to tap the messages, see the groups that are there, and then be able to go into them one by one, or do them with the shift click by opening up separate tabs on desktop. To me, I've just seen a lot more engagement when I am engaged. And I've been, guilty of those apology posts, not necessarily like, don't punish me, but hey, sorry, playing a little bit of catch up here. But just tactically, it does make a difference. As you and I were chatting a little bit offline, we were talking about how many groups we're each a part of. I think I'm a part of, I want to say 10. And to me, I see about 20x the reach. I've stopped a couple of times and just posted without the engagement groups, and then posted into the engagement groups, and then looked at that across my posts. And it's typically about 20x the reach that I've seen. Is it something similar for you? Or I don't know if you've necessarily A/B tested it that way.
No, I haven't been very particular about that, but I would say yes. I would expect that my spread is probably 5 to 7x. And of course, it all depends on, all the things that affect it. The media in the post, I've seen video slow down a little bit and text only pick up a little bit, but it's constantly for a while, video was just on fire. I couldn't put a video up without getting 1,000 views on it. And now if something hits 1,000, I'm like, oh, that was a good video. So it's really interesting, the ebb and flow on all of this. But I will say it definitely is a 5 to 7x for me. And I'm in about 5 groups.
Hey everybody, Logan with Sweetfish here. You probably already know that we think you should start a podcast if you haven't already. But what if you have and you're asking these kinds of questions? How much has our podcast impacted revenue this year? How's our sales team actually leveraging the podcast content? If you can't answer these questions, you're actually not alone. This is why Casted created the very first content marketing platform made specifically for B2B podcasting. Now you can more easily search and share your audio content while getting greater visibility into the impact of your podcast. The marketing teams at Drift, Terminus, and here at Sweetfish have started using Casted to get more value out of our podcasts, and you probably can too. You can check out the product in action at casted.us/growth. That's casted.us/growth. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, absolutely, man. To me, it was an interesting point there that you made about you can recognize kind of the self-serving, the promotional. I think there's a new acronym for spam, and what you said, highly irrelevant, non-personal, self-promotional. I'm not sure what that works out to be, but something that I thought about that's naturally happened for me as well is that post is going into several groups, or maybe one group of 5 of your close colleagues or acquaintances on LinkedIn, maybe as much as 50, but it makes you think. When I put something in, I'm thinking, what is Ethan going to think about this post? What's Sangram going to think about this post? What's John Ruggie maybe going to think about this? And it almost makes you think a little bit more critically about your content. You would think, oh, if I post this and I'm thinking about the 5,000 views I'm going to get, then you are thinking about it. But putting those faces that are very close to you, knowing that they're going to be the first ones to see it, potentially engage or not, to me kind of informs the way that you go about posting and creating content for LinkedIn. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. It does. Because it just humanizes it. I mean, what are we doing this for anyway? I mean, if it's not true to you and it doesn't reflect favorably on you and your brand, like why would you do it at all? And so when you think about the people you like and respect and, would this person appreciate it? Would I bother calling people I know over onto it for their feedback? Because I'm not highly programmatic about this, but I've identified probably 4 or 5 styles of posts that I've done over the past year or so as I've spent more time on LinkedIn. And one of them is kind of like a survey, like, this is something I've been thinking about. Here are 1 or 2 things I've observed about it. Have you observed similar? What do you think about this? And so the one about LinkedIn groups last week was one where, I called a handful of people over. And so this idea of having that in the back of your mind, is this worth calling people over on, is a good kind of a filter for, is this worthy? Am I offering something that reflects favorably on me?
Yeah. You've started some really great conversations and thus gotten a lot of reach and a lot of engagement on your posts with, what you call these survey posts. You mentioned 4 or 5 that you've kind of honed in on. Could we take a little sidebar there and maybe talk about the other types of posts that you've been doing as people think about not only maybe leveraging engagement groups, but varying up their content a little bit, maybe using some of the formulas that you've seen some success with as you've been more engaged in putting out original personal content on LinkedIn over the last year or so?
Sure. As you mentioned, I host the Customer Experience Podcast and the CX series on B2B Growth. And so, with episodes coming out every week, and I'll do a solo one almost every month, that is really dominant for me. And so what I'm doing with those is after I record the episodes in Zoom, I'm taking little video clips and I cut them down to, 30 to 120 seconds or so. And they hold one key idea. And so I'll offer that up as just either something people can know and learn, but even better is, when you ask a question around it, or you give people a reason to engage around it. So I've been using video clips to prop up some of the podcast episodes to kind of highlight the guests and let the guests who spend time with me on the show know that other people are interested in what they're doing. So it's great for me. It's just a pleasure for me to have, because I've been on the other side of it too, where I'm a guest on someone's show. They put up a post, whether it's video or a graphic or just text alone. And you get to have a conversation about, the themes that you shared. Obviously, if I'm guesting on a podcast, someone's talking to me about simple personal videos and how to do it and why to do it and when to do it and advanced strategies or whatever the case may be. And so, it's not my life's work, but it's the work of the past decade of my life. So, I enjoy talking about it and engaging people and learning what people think about it and all of that. And so the podcast itself and calling people over. Another thing that I do is as a consumer of content, I will sometimes put up a post about someone else's podcast or their book or something else that they wrote or published, and gives you a chance to prop up other people. It does have this kind of like view into someone else's network. If they start engaging, you start to see the party starts coming over onto your post from wherever it was before, and so I meet new people that way. I do things that are on my mind. I'll ask people about. That's actually turned into 2 of my self episodes on the podcast because the feedback is so, my best one was about LinkedIn prospecting and, what do you do when you get that connection request? And it's just like, got that, it's not going to go well. They're going to try to pitch you. And that thing, gosh, I know there are people on LinkedIn with a much better presence and a much greater reach than me, but that got in front of like 17,000 people with over 100 comments. Like that was one of the obviously the hottest topics I've ever posted on there. And I ended up kind of breaking it down and turning it into a couple pieces of content because it was so interesting. It was obviously interesting to people. I'll share articles, kind of like the traditional curation thing, things that I think are interesting. And sometimes they're just to say, I share them because I just think other people should know about it. It's not really a strategic, improve your reach kind of a thing. I'll use the article as an anchor. So instead of rewriting all the themes, I'll use the article and its graphic, A, to validate the source of the content, and then B, to tee up a conversation about the article. So those are just a handful of things that I do. And I don't pre-program it. I'm not all buttoned up on this stuff. It's just, as things occur to me. I came into today and I had, a lot of things teed up. It's a Monday. I don't know when you're listening, but it's a Monday as we record this. So, I didn't come into the office over the weekend, which I often do to kind of tidy things up. And so I just didn't bother creating anything this morning. In fact, I haven't even been in the engagement groups yet. Right. So, those are just a few styles of posts. I try to be consistent, but I'm not highly programmatic or rigid about it.
Ethan, one of the best practices that we've seen, James really kind of imparted this on me, is commenting on the comments. It kind of surprises me oftentimes when I see a post start to take off. Maybe it gets 20, maybe it gets 50 or more comments, and the author has not responded to any of those comments. What are your thoughts on that, or advice to folks in this area, man?
I always like to, if it's a thoughtful comment, I always try to comment on it. So some of those are a little more lightweight, like, "This is fire, bro," right? I might just give that a like, But if it's a thoughtful comment or a question, that's the worst. That's pains me deep down inside. You put this post up and a bunch of people see it. People leave comments and someone asks a question and the question goes unanswered. It's just brutal. It's like, so I'll jump in and answer people's questions as well on other people's posts. So for me, I think about it where, not every post takes off. For me, it's some fraction of my posts. And so when you start to see that the spark has caught and there's really good engagement on there, I see going in and liking the comments and giving a feedback or answering the question or whatever the case may be, engaging in those comments and creating real conversation really just helps that fire get going.
Yeah, I love it, man. It has a twofold effect. It continues the conversation. I'm with you. It just pains me to see that question and the author of the post has never responded. It's like you generated what at least I'm trying to generate, which is meaningful conversations, but you let the conversation stop. It's like someone was knocking on your door and you just said, "Nope, never mind. I didn't actually want you to knock," when that was the point in the first place. But then also when you think about it, at least in my experience, LinkedIn's algorithm highly favors and rewards post visibility based on comments even more than what they now call reactions, which has gone beyond likes to the thinky face and the heart and all those others. But the comments really carry a lot of weight. And so when I see a post that has 50 comments, I'm like, that easily with hardly any effort, even if you're not as thoughtful as you're saying to be right here, could have 100 comments super easily. Why wouldn't you do that? So I love that you added that there. I think that I've ebbed and flowed, as I just mentioned, a few minutes ago, and I've been very programmatic about it at times where, okay, I know this is a good episode here on B2B Growth. I'm going to, tee up some written content. And I'm going to, put that on Trello and mark, okay, I'm going to put that out for next Monday, this and that. I've also had times where, it's just in the moment. Maybe it's more of a mix where it's in the moment, but it might be on a Saturday afternoon. And I don't know about you, but I tend to see greater engagement on my LinkedIn content when I post weekdays and when I post earlier in the day. It seems like if I post at like 3 or 4 p.m., Mountain Time, where you and I are based, there's just tend not to get as much engagement. So I do try to think about those things, but capture them while they're in the moment. So it doesn't just become this, well, every Thursday's episode of B2B Growth is going to be a 200-word post on LinkedIn, but vary it up a little bit. So, I hear what you're saying there too, is there's some formulas to follow, but, be ready to go off the cuff. I've seen some people get a lot of engagement lately with, quick, maybe 4 or 5 line posts that could literally be a tweet, but they were thoughtful. They were in the moment. They asked a good question, or they, said something that made you think. And so we started building out our LinkedIn strategy, realizing that, hey, most people who are maybe repurposing their podcast content aren't even going the step that you've been going, Ethan, is like, key takeaway, unpack it, make this piece of content stand alone on itself, which I think a lot of people are scared of because they're like, well, if I get the value here, then I don't have to click through and get the episode. Which would you rather get? Greater, engagement and brand reach here with eventually more click-throughs, or, smaller reach and even smaller click-throughs, even though they're a higher percentage of those that click through. But what I found is, so what we started doing was 200 to 300 word posts that stood on their own. But then I've even found where you can get too formulaic there, where you stick to the same length, the same style, everything, just because the broken up one sentence posts on LinkedIn work well. Hey, if you've never thrown emojis into your LinkedIn post, if you've never done a 2-liner, try that out and test it out. I think that's where I've gotten some of the most benefit in more reach on my content, and also just reflecting on my own content strategy by coming up with these different ideas and ways to vary it up, which don't really come to you if you're not in the trenches doing it on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I just want to double back on something that could be, I don't know if it's inferred or implied, but I think inferred from what you just offered there, which is the comments themselves are content. And so it doesn't all have to be about the post itself. You could look at the post as a means to an end, and the end is not impressions. The end is feedback, curiosity, engagement, comments, etc. Like if you're looking, if you think about the post itself as the precursor to the real content, just teeing it up, framing it, encouraging it, whatever, you can turn your comments into content. And frankly, I don't know about you, but I spend almost as much time in a good post that I'm interested in. I spend as much time reading the comments and participating in the comments, probably 2 or 3 times the amount of time as it took to read or consume the post initially. So there's a lot to be learned and taught and shared and enjoyed in the comments themselves. And so don't just think about the post as the end in and of itself or the means to get X number of impressions, but instead, if you think about some of your posts as the means to create comments, I think that's a valuable approach as well.
I like what you said about just time blocking, because I think for folks who aren't active on LinkedIn or any other social platform, and maybe they're thinking about this for their own podcast or other content that they're creating, it can seem a little bit daunting. But as we've talked about here, there's a number of different ways that you can make this effective. You can make it manageable and be able to continue on. 2 resources I'm thinking for folks today. I mentioned one earlier. We'll link to it in the show notes. James and I did an episode a while back on how to leave thoughtful comments on LinkedIn posts. And even if you're not there in creating your own content, using engagement groups, that can be a great way to start to up your game on LinkedIn. And the other one is one on your show, Ethan, on the Customer Experience podcast. You did breaking down, spammy LinkedIn connection requests, the impact, and several different things there that I think were very tactical for folks. So we'll link to both of those in the show notes. Ethan, any other parting thoughts you want to leave with folks today, man?
No, I mean, it does take time. There's some things that you can't scale. You don't want to have bots going out and reading your LinkedIn feed and dropping botful comments. This does take, if you want to have meaningful, that is a new word, by the way, botful. If you want to have I like what you did there with the comments, is like, if you want to have meaningful conversations and legitimate connections with people, it does take some time. And so, if you can't spare it today, you can't spare it today. But I think if you can make it a little bit of a habit to be in there a few times a week, just to see what's going on and not just scroll and, lurk essentially, but jump in and participate, I think you'll start to see the rewards very, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I love that advice. And, the way you broke it down, 10 minutes a day oftentimes can be that difference maker. It's not like you need to spend half your day, especially if you're a busy executive and leading teams. A lot of folks listening to this, sit in those seats. And we're not saying you have to spend 3 hours a day on LinkedIn, but 10 to 15 minutes a day, every day is a consistent habit. And like you said, not just scrolling, but going specifically to those folks that are engaging with your content, engaging with theirs, and putting out that fresh content yourself can yield a world of results. Well, man, this is great. I'm glad we finally recorded one of our great conversations, which you always bring a lot to. If anybody listening to this isn't as familiar with you, Ethan, or wants to reach out, stay connected, what's the best way for them to do that, man?
I'll give you 2 ways. First, I'm Ethan Beute. Last name is spelled Beute. So I welcome a LinkedIn connection request, especially if you add a note. It's always helpful. It just separates you from... shocking how many people send connection requests without a note. So that always helps. Or you can just email me directly. I'm just Ethan, ETHAN, at BombBomb.com. That's the word bomb twice, BOMB.com.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for making time for the conversation today. It's always fun chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you, Logan.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with.
That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.